the southeastern U.S. Protests continue in Atlanta after a shooting death at the hands of the local police. Standing by live with us is our Georgia correspondent, Philip Toledo, with the latest. Aloha, Philip.
Thank you, Alfred. Over the past several weeks, Atlanta and the surrounding area has seen thousands take to the streets in protest of racial injustice and police brutality. It seemed as if things had started to calm down when last Friday night, a black man, Rayshard Brooks, was shot and killed during an encounter with Atlanta police. Officers were responding to a complaint of a man asleep in a car in a Wendy's drive-thru. After Mr. Brooks, who was the one asleep, failed a field sobriety test, the officers moved to arrest him. Based upon released dashcam footage, he began to resist, leading to a struggle wherein he grabbed one of the officers' tasers and attempted to flee, at which point one of the officers discharged their service weapon. He was transported to a nearby hospital where he was later pronounced deceased. Atlanta Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms expressed her frustration regarding yet another instance of alleged excessive force by the Atlanta PD in the past 2 weeks. Let's take a look.
For the third time in just 2 weeks, I have spent the better part of a day reviewing video footage involving allegations of excessive use by members of the Atlanta Police Department. Tragically, the most recent incident involved the fatal shooting of a 27-year-old man, Rayshard Brooks.
She then called for the immediate termination of the officer who fired the shots at Mr. Brooks.
While there may be debate as to whether this was an appropriate use of deadly force, I firmly believe that there is a clear distinction between what you can do and what you should do. I do not believe that this was a justified use of deadly force and have called for the immediate termination of the officer.
Now, as protests in Atlanta and really across the country have rallied for weeks for the reform of police departments and procedures, the mayor went on to share some of the actions she was putting in place as a result of this incident.
We have already convened an advisory committee to examine our use of force policies in our city and expect feedback within the next 2 weeks with final recommendations within the next 45 days.
Now, even with the termination of the officer involved, as the mayor herself had called for, protests continued throughout the weekend, blocking a major interstate, and the Wendy's where this incident took place was actually set on fire this past Saturday night. Tensions are running high in the city, all while COVID-19 is still very much present. Data released by the Georgia Department of Public Health shows an upward trend in the moving average of daily new cases, although it does appear that the moving average of daily COVID-related deaths has trended downward consistently over the last month or so. To date, there have been over 57,000 positive cases in Georgia and almost 2,500 deaths. In Atlanta, Georgia, Philip Toledo, Eagle News. We live in interesting times. Back to you, Alfred.
Mahalo. Thank you, Philip. Now, Atlanta Chief of Police has been vocal and visible as well during the last few weeks with the protests, of course, with the pandemic. What's her own reaction about this latest incident?
Yeah, that's a good question, Alfred, because I remember a few weeks ago, right after the death of George Floyd, I noticed that the Atlanta Police Chief, Erica Shields, she was very vocal, or actually very blunt, calling his death a murder and expressing her outrage as a member of law enforcement. But unfortunately, since then, there have been several very high-profile incidents here in Atlanta where officers were using excessive force, one of which, or allegedly using excessive force, one of which was, there's a video out there of these two officers forcibly removing two college students from their car during one of the protests. And apparently, after this last incident, maybe that was the straw that broke the camel's back, because the police chief has actually announced that she is going to be stepping aside. Mayor Bottoms mentioned that in her press conference this weekend as well, thanking her for her service, but also saying and agreeing with the chief that this is the best to allow for someone new to come in and help reform and rebuild trust in this community, especially after all of these things that have been happening lately.
What about the climate, in your immediate neighborhood, talking with neighbors, friends, what's the conversation like? Is there still a bit of tension, or is this part of the new normal there in Atlanta as well?
I hate to call it the new normal because as far as my memory goes back the last couple of weeks, tensions have been very high, whether it's just talking to my neighbors or even just like many of us trying to stay home and being connected to people through our many gadgets and devices. There's a lot of polarizing opinions, and even just this latest incident, people are looking at it from every different angle and being frustrated. And with the pandemic, which, like I mentioned, the numbers, I wish I was here to tell you that the numbers were going down and, we were just moving from, one problem to the next. It's like they're all adding on top of each other. But at least for me and my family, we're trying our best to stay positive.
That's good to hear, Philip. And of course, communication is key with friends, families, neighbors, regardless of opinions. I think that's really crucial to just keep an open mind and really accept each other's thoughts and just express yourselves. That's what
Absolutely.
We're here for in America. Well, you take care of yourself, please. I know it's late, and we'll see you in the next set of broadcasts. All right.
Thank you, Alfred. Take care.